I just finished my first level 2 placement in a skilled nursing facility, or a SNF, and I wanted to give you a little picture into what that looks like on the day to day in case you're getting ready to go into your own level 2 placement um, in a nursing home. Of course, this is just my experience. Every nursing home is going to run a little bit differently. Every fieldwork educator is going to be a little bit different. Um, but I thought it would be helpful and would have been something I would have liked. Before I go into it, I want to make it clear that I am not going to be giving you any details about any real people. These are kind of amalgamations of the most common things that I saw while I was there, and just examples of what I would do for those people. So, of course, the first thing that I did was arrive at 7:55 for my start time at 8. I would come into the building and I would open up the two documentation systems. There was one which nursing used and one that therapy used. Then I would print off the client list that we were supposed to see for the day. It had all the different clients and then an estimated amount of time that we should see them for. This is kind of a recommendation. You can upscale or downscale as needed, but that's the frame they'd like you to hit. Then I'd open up the therapy documentation and check what documents are due for the day. So you have progress notes, recertifications, discharges, and all of those have different amounts of paperwork that you're going to have to do, and you want to plan for that in your treatment sessions so that you can do some point of care documentation. So you might do something less involved if you need to fill out a recert, because it's a very hefty piece of documentation. Whereas if you had a discharge, that takes about 15 minutes normally. So if you had a 30-minute session, then you can do something more intensive. Then I would plan out my schedule, seeing evals first because they take the longest. There's a lot of paperwork that you want to be able to get done throughout the day. And then seeing the shortest treatment times first, because it's easier if you get behind to cut the longer treatments than if you do it in the opposite way. You can't really cut down a shorter treatment. 15 minutes is the shortest you can really go. And also trying to prioritize the clients on the locked dementia unit first, because sundowning happens in the afternoon and that unit gets really, really chaotic, and it's also really hard to pull anyone out because they're often very emotionally dysregulated. Then I'd look at productivity. What time am I going to cut? So every day, to keep a productivity of 85%, given how long we were there, we would have to see 6 hours and 50 minutes of treatment. So that's working with a patient directly. So not walking in between rooms, not sitting and documenting, being with a patient. All of the documenting and everything else has to get fit in about 30 minutes of the rest of your day. So I would look at the schedule and see that I have 2 evals slotted, and even though those are slotted for 60 minutes, it ends up taking 75, because of all the paperwork. It's quite extensive paperwork and all the chart review and everything you have to do. And so I would pick who, if it ends up taking 75, we would take time off of. So that's, 15 minutes that I have to figure out who I would take off of. Then I would get started my evaluation. You start the documentation so that they're in the system, and while the manager is working on getting the schedule ready for the next day, she has everyone she needs. Part of this is often going and getting their physical binder chart from up by the nurse's station. Sometimes you get a printed packet, but it really just depended, and you're going over like why did they normally go to the hospital and then why are they here now, figuring out any safety precautions you need to know about, and kind of getting a mental image of who you're about to go see. Once I thoroughly reviewed the chart, I would go into the little storage closet that has kind of a bunch of mismatched equipment. The way nursing homes work is that they have a storage of different assistive devices, so wheelchairs, walkers, and they get used, and then when someone leaves, they return to the nursing home. And so that means that they're often broken, missing pieces, different heights, and you have to figure out what will work best out of what you have for your person. And also a walker to be able to do transfers. That one's a lot less hard though. Then I would go to see the evals, and I'd start with a little bit of an interview. Their ability to participate would really vary, of course, depending on their diagnoses and how confused they are. So some of these we're not going to ask, just playing it by how it goes. But I put it in a little page protector. You can't really see very well, can you? So that I could just bring a whiteboard marker and write directly on here and then erase it after. So the things I would ask are, the things in order on here are give them privacy, so pull their curtain, shut their door, explain who we were, ask them how they're doing, ask their pain level, 0 to 10, and where. Then I like to kind of uplift the mood and say, we're going to ask you a bunch of questions. They're going to seem really random, but they're important for us to help you get back to whatever your goals are. And that normally included, do you have dentures? Were you using a cane, a walker, a wheelchair at home? Do you live alone? If not, who with? And if you don't live with anyone, was anyone else coming in to help you? Do you have any stairs? And I would specifically ask, if you drive up to your house and get out of the car, are there any steps between the car and the front door? And then after that, are there any steps that you have to get up inside your house? And you want to know how many. Because if you don't specify that out of the car thing, you might say, how many steps are there to get into your house? And they'll say none. And then later you'll find out that even though their house is on ground level, and to get from the yard into the house, there's no steps. To get from the car into the house, there's a whole flight of steps because they live on a hill. Then you ask if there are any handrails with the steps. Do you have handrails on your toilet? Is it a high toilet? Were you getting any help with showering or toileting? Did you have a bench or a seat in your shower? Were you doing laundry? Were you cooking? Were you working? Were you getting any help with dressing? Did you have any falls? Were you doing your meds? Do you have a plan for where you would like to go after this? Are you staying here in the nursing home? Are you going to assisted living? Are you going home? Yeah. And so then once we gather all of that information, again, depending on how confused they are, you can start to build a picture of what we're going to be doing in this evaluation. So we want to evaluate functional things, and also, if we can, get some standardized measures. So if it's falls, we might do a forward functional reach, because that's a really good measure for falls. If they're having issues with fine motor coordination, we might do a 9-hole peg test. For most people, though, we did the Barthel Index as our standardized score, which was really nice because you didn't have to bring anything to do a standardized test. You could just do it after the fact. All right. So now I'm going to kind of go through my fake little case studies based off of things I had seen of what that might be like. So I might have 2 evals for the day. The first one might be somebody who, reading their chart, they went into a diabetic coma. They're very weak. And, getting in there, they're very confused. It takes a while to get meds right after that type of thing. And so in our time, which it's normally 40 minutes for all the paperwork, and then we do a 35-minute in-person portion. We are only able to really get them to sit at the edge of the bed with a lot of help, max of 2, and then do a stand pivot to the wheelchair. And that takes our whole session. And then I might have another eval where the person has COVID, giving them generalized weakness, but they're a min assist. They're really just here to get a little stronger. And so we do the whole works. We get them up out of bed, we go to the bathroom, we get dressed, brush our teeth, and we check how they're going to do propelling in a wheelchair, because even though they can walk for the first while, we want to give them a wheelchair to be independent, moving around the facility until we clear them to walk alone. And then after that, I start the rest of the day. I keep saying I, but of course this is with my fieldwork educator. It's just easier to say I. So if I have 2 evals, I might have 10 other people. So we might go see our first person, and they have Parkinson's. They're a min assist. I have them for 55 minutes. I normally, if I don't know the person, will either ask what they've been doing, or I'll look at the notes if I have time. So I might do some walking from their room to the therapy gym. We might do a fine motor activity to work on the coordination of their hands, which is very hard with Parkinson's. Normally we have little toys and stuff we can work on in the gym, like geometric tiles. Then we'll work on dynamic standing balance. So, of course, a fave for this is a balloon toss, because balloons are very unpredictable, and it really challenges your balance to hit the balloon, watch it, all of that. And then we'll do some exercise with a dowel rod, really targeting those big amplitude movements that are so important with Parkinson's. Then I might have another patient who's here because they had a fall and have multiple fractures. They might be fully dependent, which means we need a lift to get them up. And so we might just work on, laying in bed, supine, doing active range of motion to their upper limbs. So not weighted or anything if they're especially really fatigued. Something I like to do in rooms to get range of motion and, crossing midline and everything in a fun way is to bring in a basket and balls and kind of run around the room holding it at different places and having them throw the ball. And we might do some positioning of whatever limb is fractured to try to prevent any contractures and promote healing. I might do that, have that patient for 30 minutes. Then I might have my next person for 25 minutes. They might have non-weight bearing on both of their legs. I And to make it even better, because they're non-weight bearing, they might be confused. And let's say they're dependent but moderately, like monocyst for most things, except for transfers. We might do some dressing, but seated edge of bed, and then laying down with rolling side to side to hike up the pants. And then do some in-bed grooming. And that might take us 25 minutes. Then we might have a classic nursing home patient who has, generalized weakness and the forward head posture. That's very common. People pile a bunch of pillows behind their head and sit in bed like that, or sleep in their wheelchairs. They might be a mod assist. So we might work on wheelchair propulsion to, get them moving around the facility, hopefully up and looking at things. And we might do some dynamic standing. So, set up with an activity, and then some neck range of motion exercises and some weighted exercises for the upper extremities. And that might all take 55 minutes. Then we might go over to the locked dementia unit and see somebody for positioning and self-feeding, which is very common towards the later stages of dementia. So they're going to be fully dependent. We might work on getting them positioned with like bolsters and different equipment in a jerry chair. We might be trialing it, so putting it on for the length of the session and taking it off, checking for skin redness, etc. And while they're sitting up, we might work on self-feeding. So seeing what level contrast bowls, what different adaptive equipment for eating helps them eat without spilling things. And seeing what different cues work for them to convey to staff. So a common one is giving the first bite of food, putting something on the spoon, and then placing it in the person's hand, especially towards that end stage. It helps trigger, like, I've just had something in my mouth, I'm holding a spoon and there's food on it, and so they might eat. We might have that person for 40 minutes. Then we might see a stroke, who might have the one-sided paralysis that's classic with strokes. They're probably, if they're an early stroke, going to be max assist of 2. So we might work on learning how to do active assistive range of motion with, moving their paretic side with their other side. And we might also do some mirror therapy. So that's the putting a mirror in between their vision and their paretic side, and then having them move this side and having e-stim on their other side and having it move at the same time in the same pattern while they're watching the mirror. Anyway, that might take us 30 minutes. Then we might see another person who's got generalized weakness and confusion, might be dementia, not really sure what's happening there, type of situation. That's very common in nursing homes. I think people put their relatives in a nursing home because they're not safe at home. There's some weird stuff going on, but nobody's taken them to actually get a diagnosis of dementia. And they might be, up and walk in, they can talk to you, just like some odd phrases, and lack of carryover of things that have been said. So, we might work on toileting, cues for safety in that, hand hygiene, and some, exercise just to get them stronger. And that'll probably take 30 minutes. And that's lunch. It's really a breakneck pace. So the aim that I was trying to do from my fieldwork educator's advice is to keep 3 towards the end. So after lunch, only 3 patients. So after lunch, maybe our first person is a progressive neurological condition. Um, they're probably going to be a max assist. And we might work on bed mobility. So, using bed rails to roll side to side, maybe to do something like dressing, or maybe just to reposition comfortably. And if we can, we might do a transfer to a wheelchair, and that'll probably be about 30 minutes. Then we might have someone with heart failure. That's very common, so they'll probably be very short of breath. You're definitely going to have to check them with a pulse ox. They might be like very high level. It just depends on how far along it is. So let's say for this mythical case study here, this person's supervision level for things, you're just working on educating them about energy conservation. So we might do some wheelchair propulsion, or some dressing with heavy education on safety and energy conservation. And we might do that for 15 minutes because they can't tolerate a very long session. And then we get to our last person of the day. So this might be somebody with a brain injury, who's very impulsive, has a lot of safety deficits, and from that brain injury, they could have any scale of impairment, but let's go with mod assist for things. So we might do some transfer training, so working on getting from the wheelchair to the bed, or the bed to the wheelchair, with education on like checking the brakes, using adaptive equipment like a walker, which might be new to them, so it's really hard to get that adherence. And we might trial these things repeatedly and ask kind of pointed questions to try and get some sticking of that information. And then we might do a activity that involves like bilateral involvement of the upper extremities, and hopefully crossing midline. So, maybe like some folding clothes and handing it. Something functional if you can, or maybe a game. And that might take us 40 minutes. And then that would be our schedule. For each person, in addition to the regular documentation, I'd do a treatment note. And I would say how long we did each thing by picking CPT codes. If we pick, I can't remember all of this, but say we have somebody who I did exercise and mirror therapy on, I might do 15 minutes of TheraX, and 15 minutes of Easton for the codes. And then when I write my note, I might write the note for the TheraX as Res instructed in active assistive range of motions, all joints, all planes, 2 times 15 reps to improve range of motion for functional activities. Res educated in the importance of performing daily active assistive range of motion to lubricate joint space. Res encouraged to perform once daily. So that would be a whole day. It's a lot. It's very important that you do point of care documentation just because of how much it is. But I don't really know how it compares to anywhere else yet. I also plan on doing maybe a what's in my fieldwork binder style video, because I didn't know what to bring with me, and I think it might be helpful. So we'll see, but that's a fictional day in my fieldwork at a nursing home. See you next time.